The work of art always announces the death of the author, or at the very least their absence. The text in hand is always memory, something that was written to hold off death and time. While authors try to hide from this, behind a book tour or a celebrity opening, there is no hiding from this aspect of death in art when looking at the posthumously published novel. When you publish a novel posthumously, you're really, really trying to keep something in the memory of people. And you really see that when you're looking at, for example, Ralph Ellison's Juneteenth, or Toole's Confederacy of Dunces, or even everything Franz Kafka did. And you see this right here in David Bowman's Big Bang. David Bowman died in 2012. The book was put out in 2019. It's 5-year anniversary, and I have the pleasure tonight of talking with Andrew Lewis Conn, essayist, author, critic, who's come out with a great essay in this month's Believer called Here Comes Everybody, discussing the influence and the impact of the Big Bang by David Bowman.
What Big Bang is, it's Bowman's attempt to tell a comprehensive story of America during the baby boom years, from post-World War II, culminating in the Kennedy assassination. But what makes it so fascinating and unique is that rather than one protagonist or linear plot, he tells the story through a series of hundreds of short vignettes. Some of them are only, a page or two long, all about the real-life historic, political, and cultural figures of the day.
So these aren't surreal vignettes.
No.
These are highly realistic.
Yes, fictionalized but well researched, and all of the characters, the psychology rings true. None of it is caricatured. It's all very quirky and psychologically acute.
I remember in your essay you talk about one moment in a supermarket where
Saul Bellow and Arthur Miller in Nevada, they're both they're waiting on their divorces to come through, and they're shopping for groceries because they're living in these cabins, and they're just talking about girls and stuff. It's hilarious, and it's hundreds of scenes like that, where you feel like you're eavesdropping on America's hidden life during those years. I described it in the book, in the essay, as like the Raiders of the Lost Ark of American literature. It's just one show-stopping set piece after another, and it's like the greatest movie trailer you've ever seen, but it's a 600-page book. It's just spectacular, and it's the 5-year anniversary, and it's a book that deserves to be canonized and deserves to be read, and Bowman shouldn't be forgotten.
And your essay in The Believer is great. It's out this month. It's out July. It's very interesting because the essay really digs into this world that is, I almost think it would be kind of foreign to someone who didn't grow up in a world where we have those kind of cultural references. I mean, to be blunt, I don't even know if anyone's going to care about the assassination of Martin Luther King in 20 years.
So, yeah, that's a great point. The characters, though, aren't sketches, so you don't need to know who McNamara is to enjoy, those scenes. You don't need to know who Lucille Ball is to enjoy, her confrontation with the House Un-American Activities Committee. You don't need to know.
That's in there? That's
great.
great.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great bit. So that's fine. It's the propulsion of the book. I mean, the structure is so interesting because you would think that it has this pinwheel structure, and you'd think, there would be no momentum, that the book would just fly apart, fly to pieces, but it doesn't. It gathers force as it moves on, and America becomes the protagonist, and you are convinced by the end that yes, this is the mix, this is the brew that led us to this event. And in knowing Bowman's backstory, you can't help but well, it takes your breath away that he didn't live to see through this triumph, but also you get a sense that he is selecting, he's curating, and it's a breadcrumb trail. He's saying, this is what's important to me. These are the signal moments of the culture when I was forming my identity. These are the signal works of art. And so you can't help when reading it but think about your own touchstones. And you start thinking about your own autobiography. And I tried to get at that a little bit in the article. You get the sense that the culmination doesn't feel forced. It feels like, well, given all of these vectors moving around, of course, it would bubble up into this kind of historic calamity. And he does it without, and this is interesting, he does it without leaning into conspiracy thinking. And what's fascinating there is in Letham's essay, when Bowman did kind of descend into becoming a bit of a difficult character and a bit of a crank, he got hooked on 9/11 conspiracy theories and things like that, and alienated a lot of folks. But his novelistic intelligence was higher. His novelistic intelligence delivered him to an Oswald acting alone scenario.
Yeah. Andrew, let's talk a little bit about the context in which Big Bang came out and who David Bowman was.
Sure. So David Bowman was an interesting fellow. He had a debut novel called Let the Dog Drive, which was terrific. He had another book that I'd not read called Bunny Modern. Yeah. And he also wrote an oral history of the Talking Heads called This Must Be the Place, which is terrific.
Because again, he's coming out of the music scene. He's a music journalist?
Yeah, he also was a music journalist. He interviewed like Lou Reed and people like that for New York Times Magazine and other big outlets. So working journalist kind of, and a bartender, that sort of thing. Then, tragically, in his early 50s, he had a brain hemorrhage and dropped dead.
This is in 2012.
2012, yeah, at age 54. He fell into obscurity. And then years go by, I think 7 years go by, and then sure enough, his book posthumously comes out, Big Bang. And it was almost like a Joe Gould secret. He'd promised this book that would be, an epic-making book, and he delivered it posthumously. Jonathan Lethem was one of his closest friends when they were starting out. Bowman had already published. Bowman was sort of the senior literary figure in that relationship at the beginning, and then Lethem fairly rapidly eclipsed him. And Lethem wrote a very beautiful introduction to the book about their friendship, about Bowman, and that was published in the New Yorker. So there was a bit of a spotlight on the book when it came out, but it sort of.
And Lethem describes a kind of troubled individual.
Yeah, as Bowman wasn't met with the success that he longed for and expected. It sounded like he was a difficult person. He had a difficult upbringing. He started alienating his friends. He started becoming a bit of a crank. And Lethem's essay is gorgeous, but it's also somewhat tortured. You get a sense of someone kind of needing to step away from a dear friend out of self-preservation.
Yeah.
But it's a very loving tribute. So it's kind of a miracle of a book. When this came out, he was pretty much forgotten. It's a very special book, and Ed Park, the great Ed Park, one of the co-founders of The Believer, fantastic author. His novel was recently shortlisted for the Pulitzer, Same Bed, Different Dreams. He recommended the book to me a while ago, and when I read it, I was knocked out. We just started geeking out about it, and I said, why isn't everyone reading this book? It's so good. It's so interesting. To me, it read like a bullet, because again, it has these short sections. Very much like a mosaic. I think Bowman also was forging an interesting new path for the novel that a big book could take and still be engaging. A 600-page book that tries to take it all in, because that is a question, like what is the novel today, and what are the different responses to the phones and social media and
also
streaming?
What's an American novel?
What's an American novel? Or if if the great American novel were to come out, would people know? I mean, would people be hip to it? In the essay, I quoted the great critic Pauline Kael on Mailer. She said, his prose gives you the excitement of movies, and I think the same thing could be said of Bowman. But I think this is a question that hovers over novel culture. Like, what is the response to streaming media and social media and the phones? And I think that a reason people make art, a reason people, I'm speaking for myself, a reason a person writes, part of it is an attempt to arrest time and to put it down. So I'm reading a lot of Nabokov these days, research for something I want to write. And his son Dmitri, he'd be harassed by people, about Lolita. What does it feel like to have a father who's a pervert, right? And Dmitri would say, every line my father wrote was poetry. It can't be, pornographic. So Lolita's a prime example of that, where you have, it's like the ultimate literary bait and switch, where you have the most horrific scenario imaginable, the most horrific, worse than murder, right? The soul death of a child, right? And yet the prose is so voluptuous that it's an exquisite literary experience.
You write down things that people said because they're not around. They're absent. So it's a way of fighting off death.
But that it is, and that's part of it too. So Bowman never got to see it out. He never got to see his triumph. This is a great American book. Mm-hmm. He did it. He wasn't full of it. He wasn't Joe Gould. He delivered it. But when I open the book and I read it, he's alive. He's still alive. He is alive. I feel like I know this person. I feel like I know his taste. I feel like I know how he thinks. So that must be part of it. That must be part of the impulse to do any kind of art.
And thus, from acts of art to acts of commerce, the other side of the posthumously published novel.
So the other side.
And you mentioned Nabokov.
Right.
And I think that's really. So why don't you show me what you were talking about with Mr. Nabokov?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of interesting posthumously published novels. I'll put that in Nixonian air quotes. So Vladimir Nabokov, when he died, was working on a book called The Original of Laura, and Nabokov famously would outline his books on index cards, and he'd do a scene on each card. And, he said he could shuffle the deck and then pull out a card, and he'd write that scene that day, almost like a crossword puzzle. They didn't have to write it in order.
Yeah, Pale Fire was written that way. I remember that. I've actually seen the cards from Pale Fire.
Yeah. So he was working on this book when he died, and his only son, Dmitry Nabokov, very interesting character, mountain climber, opera singer, race car driver, but the second half of his life was his chief translator and ran the estate. And Nabokov, when he died, in the will, it was like, do not publish The Original of Laura if it's unfinished. And Dmitry honored his father's wishes for about 25 years, I want to say. And then later in life, I think it was in his late 70s, they finally published the book to great fanfare, Nabokov's final novel. And Dmitry said, it's something like it's the apotheosis of all of his work, and a new path for the novel and this and that. And it's not a novel. I'll show it to you. It's they reproduce in his handwriting, the index cards, and it's done on this heavy cardstock paper, like an art book, with perforations. Cool. You can literally pop the index cards out of the book, and they're flashes of.
It's actually kind of rough. There's only one card per page, though.
Yeah, there's the odd phrase or so that's, flashes of his genius and all that, but it's not a book. And there's a character Hubert, and it's just it's not. And for someone as fastidious and controlling as Nabokov of his work, of his oeuvre, it does seem like something of a betrayal, that this maybe would have been better served, in the New York Public Library, for viewing by academics and scholars, or the Ransom Library or something like that. But it was, again, published to great fanfare, and that's more of a marketing publicity machine job than anything else. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, more recently, this recently came out just a couple of weeks ago, I think, a couple of months ago. Later in life, he was falling into dementia.
Mm-hmm.
There's a novella, Until August. The New Yorker had published a portion of it. He had said to his sons, the only thing I have as a writer is my memory. And when that started going, he said, destroy the book. They sat on it, I think, for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And their rationale in the intro is that as part of their father's dementia, he did not appreciate how good what existed actually was.
Yeah.
And they make no bones about it. They say it's not up to par with, 100 Years of Solitude and others. But
Pratchett, it's the same kind of thing happening to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, Terry Pratchett, when he started getting into Parkinson's and dementia.
Yeah. So that's recent. This is an interesting example. So David Foster Wallace, right? And we were talking about, different paths for the novel. And certainly when we were, in high school or college, he might have been like the rock star. I mean, if there was an author, he was the Kurt Cobain.
Well, he just killed himself senior year. Yeah, it was our senior year he killed himself. I remember being in Stuyvesant.
No, it was after that, because he was 48. He was 48. Yeah, I was already working at that point. Yeah, it wasn't.
Really?
Yeah, it was. It was maybe 15 years ago, I want to say. It wasn't that long ago. Yeah, but he was working on this book, The Pale King, about IRS accountants.
Okay.
And sprawling book, and he kills himself. He hangs himself in the garage where he hangs himself. He puts a spotlight on a stack of manuscript pages and a stack of floppy disks that have all the bits and pieces. It sounded like, from the biography, that he was having just a hell of a time, wrestling, this tornado of a book into shape. His editor, his agent, I think very lovingly put it together in the way that they thought made sense, and it's a terrific book.
Yeah.
And it shows him graduating from some of his pyrotechnics to a much more direct, plain-spoken, emotive, naked style, which I think he and his cohort and friend, Jonathan Franz, and also you see him moving in that direction. What's interesting there is that years later, McNally Books puts out a novella called Something to Do with Paying Attention, which is the self-contained finished portion of The Pale King that Wallace felt was done, and he was considering publishing that as a novella in the lead up to The Pale King.
Yeah.
So I kind of give a pass. I give a pass on these. This I think is a special case.
I mean, as I do Juneteenth, as I do,
Juneteenth,
I do, Confederacy of Dunces.
Confederacy of Dunces also, and they're also similar to Bowman. The backstory informs the reading of the book, where the author kills himself, and then the mother goes on this mission. She's hell bent on getting this book published, and then it's published, and then wins the Pulitzer posthumously, and it's terrific. At least the first half is terrific.
It definitely needs an edit. I mean, that was the interesting thing.
It needs an edit.
That was the interesting thing when you look at that. Like, a book like that. He could never have finished that book if he had to actually hand it over to someone for editing. I think he really needed to just write it. Same thing with Kafka. I don't think Kafka could ever have written what he did if he had to face publication.
I'm glad you mentioned Kafka, because there have been estates that have published work posthumously. Hemingway might be the prime example, where they put out a bunch of junk after he died. Some good stuff, but a lot, and it didn't do his reputation any favors. But the counterexample to all of this is, to your point, is Kafka, right? So 41, I think, when he dies. And he says to his best pal and executor, Max Brod, destroy it, destroy everything. And Brod goes against, his wishes and publishes it. And without Brod, there would be no Kafka. And that gets into the question of does he get a pass? Does Brode get a moral pass? Is the work bigger than the creator? Does the work no longer belong to Kafka? It belongs to, it belongs to the world. So it's just a host of very, very complicated questions. But Bowman is just joy, because he promised it, he finished it. They very lovingly put it out. It just didn't get the attention it deserves, and that's why fifth anniversary. I'm really hoping people will pick it up and read it.
Your essay in this month's issue of The Believer, and I mean it's really fascinating. I mean, it's too funny. Just talking about all that brought back to mind the end of The Tempest, where Prospero faces the audience, says, "Here I am, and please allow me to go back to Italy. Please take me off this island, bring me back, and set me free." I almost think that Shakespeare, the same sense of any author.
Well, it's Shakespeare. Yeah. The last it's him saying this is all made up.
It's all made up. So set me free, liberate me from this.
When you said that, I just rewatched Killers of the Flower Moon. Did you see Killers of the Flower Moon?
I haven't had a chance yet.
Do you know about Scorsese's appearance at the end?
No. What's this?
So without wrecking it.
Okay.
At the very end of the movie, it's a long movie. It's 3.5 hours long. At the end of the movie, they do like a 1940s or 1950s radio show segment where they basically encapsulate the whole story in this hokey FBI radio hour kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at the very end, Scorsese himself comes out to read Molly's obituary. Mm-hmm. And it's incredibly moving, because it's almost as if Scorsese, it's almost like Prospero in The Tempest. It's almost as if 81-year-old Scorsese, who in his prime was like the violent mafia guy, the tough guy director.
Who
glamorized violence.
Horrible person. I mean, I know people who worked on gangs in New York. It was a nightmare.
Well, okay, but it's almost at the end, of his career, saying, look, that would have been the version of this story, of this great American tragedy 60 years ago. It would have been packaged up as this cheap radio entertainment. And what you just watched with DiCaprio and De Niro and all this, it's good. It's trying very hard, but it's still just an entertainment. It can only do so much. It can only go so far. And I am Prospero's wizard, and I am acknowledging that these are all shades, Anyway.
So what does an author leave when they leave a book? I mean, what part of themselves, what part did David Bowman leave in this book that has lit a fire under you?
Well, it's just a great book, and when you feel an author cranking on all cylinders and they deliver the goods, and structurally it's exciting and unique. It's thrilling, and then knowing the backstory, it makes it even more poignant. And like any work of art, while I'm reading the book, Bowman is in the room. Bowman is in my brain. I know what he likes and what he doesn't, what he thinks about America, and you feel very close to a person. I mean, when I'll always remember this, when I loved Philip Roth, and I've read all of him. And I remember the morning that he died, I went to work, and a colleague said, you look a little down today, and is everything all right? I said, well, one of my favorite authors died. And she said, who? And I said, Philip Roth. And she said, who's Philip Roth? And I wanted to, go in the corner and blow my brains out. But what I meant by that I was so sad, was because having read, 35 of the man's novels, I felt like I knew him as well as I knew my own father. I felt like I knew, how does this man tick? What does he think about? The deepest things, the deepest things. And, you have to believe that that's why, writers write, and that's why artists make art, because, they're trying to put it down. They're opposing time. They're pushing back against time. So reading, it gives.
Particularly a book like this, we're talking about 1950s and 60s, really fighting time.
Yes, and then knowing that the author didn't live to see its publication, its reception, it gives it a special valence to the experience of reading it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, even when you just mentioned this, it's just that it's that sense of like how much, especially in the posthumous novel, how much it is a photograph of a moment in time. How much time, how much of a picture of it is in that moment. I mean, I haven't. I mean, again, I'm just still very much thinking, Ellison, and it's just this idea of trying to reach out and just describe that one moment, and hold off that degeneration of loss, of memory, and it's almost like they can't let go of the book. They can't get an answer. I mean, again, and this is not the case in Bowman. I mean, this book was ready to go.
Yeah.
But most of the cases of posthumous novel, they're really not.
They're not, and that's an interesting distinction, right? So like the examples we're talking about, Nabokov, Marquez, David Foster Wallace, they're godlike. So any scrap, it's like wisdom from the mountaintop, and so I understand the urge in some of these cases, like the Nabokov or the Marquez, to put it out against the author's wishes, but again, to put it out as the great artist's last statement, it's not always the case. There are no clunkers. Every portrait seems true and psychologically astute, and there are no caricatures. It's just a fully felt. It really is a miracle of a book. It's encyclopedic in the way of Pynchon or Joyce. But it's not forbidding. It's just a fast read.
And you actually explicitly make the reference to Joyce in your essay in Believer. Here Comes Everybody.
Here Comes Everybody, right, from Finnegan's Wake. I mean, that's what the book is. It's everybody. It's a cavalcade, hundreds of characters, hundreds of them in this book. And
dialogical imagination.
It's extraordinary. It really is an extraordinary book, and I hope people read it, yeah.
Andrew Lewis Conn, his essay is in this month's The Believer. You can get that on newsstands now and get that also on digital. He's talking about this book here, The Big Bang, which is done by David Bowman. Andrew's own novel you can pick up on Amazon, Oh Africa. And also just keep an eye out for his essays and his criticism. And Andrew, thank you. This has been awesome. Thank you so much.
It's been a delight. Known you a long time. Always great talking with you. Yeah.